What happened to Nolan Wells, the Mississippi teen who went to Horn Island with friends on July 4th and never returned? His body was found in the water a few days later. One of his friends who he was with is speaking out now. We're going to hear what he had to say in an interview, and I'll tell you what the next steps are in this investigation. Thanks for joining me. I'm Keisha Derry, believer of Jesus Christ, constitutional lawyer, federal litigator, a former clerk on the federal appellate court, and a crime junkie. So the friend of Nolan Wells, who was with him on July 4th, one of the people who was on the boat with him, is speaking out. His name's Tracestin Shepherd. I want you to listen to what he told the news recently.
Tracestin Shepherd declined to speak with us on camera because he says he and his friends are getting threats.
We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it. We all cared and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see Nolan die. Nobody wanted to see his life be taken so short.
Shepherd addressed this viral video that investigators have been studying. Wells's parents worried it showed their son involved in a confrontation, but Shepherd said that's him, not Wells.
That's the video I'm referring to. That's me yelling.
Shepherd says he took a boat back from Horn Island in the late afternoon, but Wells stayed behind with a girl he had met.
They met that day, and it was kind of one of those things. It did come off that day that he really did like her, but that was the only time they'd ever hung out, was at Horn Island on July 4th.
So, I think it's interesting because we can't really pinpoint exactly what happened here. It's really a shame that this young man says he's getting death threats when people have no idea what happened yet. And I think that's one of the unfortunate consequences of social media, is that people jump to conclusions before they have facts, and they assume that a situation is about something that it may not be about. But either way, Shepherd goes on to say in this audio clip, again, he says he did not want to provide a video clip because of the death threats, but he says that Shepherd said the boat experienced some electrical issues and they had to go back to shore ahead of schedule, and Nolan decided to stay behind. He also mentioned that this is something that Ben Crump, who is the parents' spokesperson, has brought up, that there has been a video that surfaced of someone yelling and demanding that somebody else give their phone back. And Tracestin Shepherd has said that was him on that video. It was not Nolan. So, right now we don't know a lot. I do think there is one fact here, though, that is a little bit curious. The parents said on Good Morning America that when they tracked his phone, Nolan Wells's phone, it was back on the mainland. The phone was not on the island. And that is a little suspicious that Nolan would leave, choose not to go back with his friends, but not take his phone or give his friends his phone. That is strange. But the parents do have the phone, and they have not yet turned it over to law enforcement, which I think is a mistake. You really want the investigators to be able to do a thorough investigation here. And unless they hire a private investigator or a tech team or something like that, there's a lot of information that investigators can get out of that phone that your ordinary people just can't get. But there seems to be a lot of mistrust here already, and I'm not sure exactly where it's coming from. I've heard Ben Crump say that the police said very early on that they didn't see any foul play, and they didn't think something else happened here, but that they thought it was a tragic accident. And the parents and the spokesperson don't believe that that's true. I think that's fair, particularly with the phone fact here, but you can't just assume that the investigators don't want to do their job. And you definitely shouldn't assume that they don't want to do their job because they're white and Nolan Wells is black. That's a big leap. All right, so what's next? All right, so we're still waiting for this autopsy. So Mississippi has done an autopsy, and the parents have asked or conducted an independent autopsy of Nolan. And from what I can tell, neither one is out yet, because autopsies take some time. With the autopsy will also come a toxicology report. So what are we looking for in the autopsy? We're looking for the cause of death. So did Nolan Wells drown in the water? If he did, there will be water in his lungs. If he was either killed or died before getting in the water, there will not be water in his lungs because you have to inhale the water for it to be there. Are there any other injuries? The police say they didn't see any obvious injuries on him, so I'm assuming there's no gunshot wounds or anything like that. Are there puncturing wounds, or is there blunt force trauma? Anything like that, that's what an autopsy is going to tell you. Sometimes when a body's in the water, it's very difficult to ascertain, the injuries, even though it didn't seem like he was in the water for very long. But the water does complicate an autopsy. And the possible time of death as well. That sometimes is complicated with an autopsy when you have water, but it can be done. You can still sort of make a timeline of when you think that victim died and then when they ended up in the water. And then a toxicology report is going to tell you anything that was in his system, alcohol, drugs, whether it be a prescription or something else that might be at play. So the autopsy is going to tell you a great deal about what happened. Now, if it just comes back that he is drowned and there were no other injuries or anything like that, that's going to make the investigation a little bit more difficult. And so the next step is going to be the friend's statements. Okay, so my guess or my assumption or my hope here is that the investigators have questioned these friends to death at this point. So they're going to ask them question after question. They're going to ask them the same question 45 different ways to see if they get a different response any of those times. They're going to look for contradictions between the friend's statements. And they're going to look at contradictions between him and the other witnesses, including the girl that he was reportedly talking to. Ben Crump says that there's some level of contradiction here because he says the girl said that Nolan Wells told her that he was going to be going home with the friends. And the friends say he said he was going to stay by on the island. So that is a contradiction that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure that the detectives will do that. The next thing, and this is really important when you have an investigation into someone's death, especially if you're starting to think that is suspicious, you need a timeline for the victim's movements that day. So you want to know everything they did from the time they got up to the time Nolan Wells got on that island. Who was he talking to? Where did he go to eat? What did he post? Which is why that phone is really important. Who he was talking to. I'm sure the girl was not the only person who saw him. So I'm assuming the detectives are wanting to talk to everyone who was on Horn Island on July 4th, wanting to know if they had any interactions with Nolan Wells. And there were reportedly about 200 people on the island that day. So that's a lot of people to talk to. And yeah, so that's what will be next. All of those things. If they're not already happening, I'm sure a lot of this is happening already, but we need that autopsy. We need to find out how he died. Now, I will say the phone is a suspicious fact, but it doesn't mean his friends killed him. And it's really irresponsible to assume that before an investigation is conducted. And social media sleuthing doesn't count. Most of the people who are posting about this or talking about this don't really know what they're talking about. And many of the facts that they're posting are incorrect.